Good morning, everybody. I pray that everyone is doing well. If you would just do us a favor and share this feed right now on your page with all of your followers. This is our sermon chat where we come on right after the worship experiences at 7:30 and 10 to take your questions about the sermon and start a new series called Becoming Today. I'll be preaching through the book of Ruth for the next several weeks. And today, sermon was We Have to Leave Here. So if you have questions about that, you can also go to our sermon notes function in our app, the Emmanuel Temple. The sermon notes are there, or we just have questions for faith matters in general. Reverend Maria, you have anything you want to share?
Good morning, everybody. I was just sharing the sermon chat on my Facebook as well. So we do encourage you and ask you to do the same. And I hope that you will put questions in our comments here and that you will share questions, comments, observations that we can use in this discussion. And we're just grateful that you've joined us.
All right. You got a question for us?
We do. Our first question. In her grief, Naomi made the decision to distance herself from her daughters-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that when grief speaks, we often choose this route and suffer in silence?
I think sometimes, I don't know if we've been taught how to, well, let me answer it this way. Oftentimes when persons sharing our grief, and you heard me say this, those at IT, we say dumb things. The Lord needed another flower in his flower garden. The Lord, blase, blase, blase. Which we put more, we don't help grievers because we add to their grief. You heard me mention Henry Nouwen, and in one of his books, one of the books called The Wounded Healer, he says that the best thing we can do when persons are grieving is to sit with them and cry with them when they want to cry, laugh with them when they want to laugh, watch TV with them when they want to watch TV. Don't say anything when they don't have anything to say. And I think part of our problem is we try to fix it. So it could be, I don't know, it could be that Naomi really wrestled with, not only losing a husband, but losing two sons. And in that era, because of the fact that she was a female and everything was so patriarchal and tied and attached to men, and then that she, at an old age, she was now going to be thought of less than in the community because she had no husband, she had no sons to help carry on the lineage. So that may be, I don't know. And I think sometimes preachers need to say, I don't know why something is.
The question says, in essence, why did Naomi and why do we sometimes, in the midst of grief, distance ourselves from other people and suffer in silence? And I think part of that may be that I think there can be several reasons why we do that. We might do that because we're embarrassed or we feel helpless and somehow we're looking or we think others are expecting, and we may be even expecting ourselves to be able to fix a situation on our own, and when we can't, or when we're in those seasons in our lives where our emotions are raw, we don't want people to see us in that place. We don't want people to see us that out of control. We don't want people to see us vulnerable. I think those are reasons why people go off and suffer in silence. And I think you mentioned earlier, that you mentioned in worship service, that I yesterday preached a sermon, words of comfort at a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about that was on Zoom, but also yesterday was the 24th anniversary of my mother's own funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up preaching at a second funeral. I don't usually do funerals, so that was the second time, and it was on that anniversary day. I didn't tell my friends who asked whose funeral I didn't tell them that That was at that date until later. And I went ahead, of course, called into service. I did what I was called to do. And I realized that, I had the potential to kind of just go off and be by myself and just kind of, we're sheltering at home, but we also can go off into places in our home and be alone by ourselves. I ended up being grateful that God didn't allow me to do that, and that actually I was called into service on that day, because in preaching that, and I've heard you say this before, in preaching in that moment, in that space, my own vulnerability was laid bare. No one really knew, but I had to rely on God in a way that I wouldn't have been challenged to rely on God had that not been the case. So I think sometimes we distance ourselves because we are thinking that we ought to have the answers. We're thinking that we ought to have the answers, and when we don't have the answers, and there's somehow we're deficient, or we don't want people to see us in our vulnerable places. But one last point, I was blessed in that memorial service, because one of the testimonies, one of the reflections talked about how the brother had gone through some major health challenges and went through one period when he didn't talk. Just completely stopped talking. But this particular sister kept visiting him, even in the midst of him not talking. And she did a very profound example of what we've been calling, what we learned in school as the ministry of presence. She didn't stop going to see him. She didn't try to fix it with words. She sat with him in silence. She played music for him, because music was something that he truly loved. And she prayed with and for him. But she didn't stop going. And she didn't let the connection that they had fall to the wayside. So that when he came out of it, he actually thanked her and told her that he knew it was difficult. And she acknowledged that she's the kind of person who doesn't always want to talk, but she's not afraid of silence. I think sometimes we're afraid of silence. We don't know what to say, so we don't seek the person out. The person doesn't want to be sought out because they don't know what to say, they don't know how to feel. So I think this is where our connections are so important, where our relationships are so important, and that we find creative ways to love each other that don't have to be about just a greeting card.
I think, my last point, my last move in the sermon today was that Naomi said no more. She was silent. She never said anything to Ruth. After Ruth said, well, you lodge, I lodge, your God be my people. I mean, your people be my people, your God be my God. She said nothing. Then we move. Then we see the next move is they get back to Bethlehem and all the other stuff goes on. We'll talk about that next week. Lord, whether the creek don't rise, the Lord spares our life. We'll be able to preach that part. But sometimes, it's so right, I think, and I have to be honest, because my parents are still alive, because, my grandparents have passed. I was very close to my grandmother. I have not had to deal with grief like you've had to deal with grief. And so it is kind of a very, from my perspective, a challenging point. Do I attach myself to you, or do I give you space? And so it's kind of, a week from Tuesday be Monday be 18 years, and I'm still navigating that with you in grief, because it can just come upon you. And you've taught me you can't fix this. There's nothing you can say. So I've probably taken the time of kind of leave you alone, get you on your space, let you get to journaling, and then when you want to come back and engage, then I'm ready to engage.
Yeah, and everybody's different. I have a friend who may even be chatting with us right now. She may be a part of this, who would sit with me in those first moments, those first days of my grief. She would just sit with me while I cried. Didn't try to fix it. And it was almost a daily ritual. We'd sit together, I'd cry. She'd comfort just by her presence. And then when I was all cried out, we'd get up, we'd go out, and we'd do our thing.
What thing is that? All right, go ahead, do your thing. All right, all right, do your thing, do your thing. All right, all right. It's time to do my thing.
Somebody said,
moving, yeah, moving, yeah.
Tell it all. You
My
can't
Lord,
tell it all.
my Lord, listen, moving, yeah, grooving, yeah. All right.
I will tell you this, Pastor. Those were some of the best moments I had on Martha's Vineyard. In the wake of my mother's, I think that was my very first trip there, actually.
Okay.
In the wake of my mother's passing, we went to Martha's Vineyard, and it was a very peaceful and beautiful place, which was a really nice backdrop for me to escape and just, reconnect with the Lord and people around me who were supporting me.
All right, so y'all, this is our sermon chat. If you are just jumping on, please share the feed on your pages so others can be blessed. We want to take a bunch of questions, so please put your questions in the chat about the sermon, starting our series on becoming. We have to leave here with the sermon title for today, Faith Matters in General. We want to take some questions and after our 10 a.m. worship experience at IT.
Amen. So you ready for the next question?
Okay.
All right, this is a good one. Praise God for good questions. What does the word say about balancing being patient with ourselves while we are becoming and striving to be who God would have us to be? What does the word say about balancing that?
I'm glad that you shared that. This was here and now in my devotional, and I put this in my notes. Said this the other day. A waiting person is a patient person. The word patience means the willingness to stay where we are and live the situation out to the full in the belief that something hidden there will manifest itself to us.
Can you say that again?
A waiting person is a patient person.
All right.
The word patience means the willingness to stay where we are and live the situation out to the full in the belief that something hidden there will manifest itself to us. I talked about
rich.
That. That's from him and now.
Can we post that?
Okay. I talked about that, and I'll text it to the tech team so they can post it.
Let's get that in the comments.
In the chat. I talked about in the sermon how God births new things in us out of grief.
Yeah.
Part of, I think, our struggle is, number one, I don't know if we acknowledge that we're grieving, and I'm going to be short because I want us to get some more questions. Second part is, I don't know if we acknowledge that we're grieving. And number two, I don't know if we cooperate with God enough. I think we do more fighting with God than we do cooperating with God.
My Lord.
And the third point is because we have not acknowledged that we're grieving, because we're fighting with God, we can't get on the other side. So we can't get balance because we still way down on the other side. And we don't see the value in waiting.
Well, I like this question. Again, just to remind everyone, the question says, what does the word say about balancing being patient with ourselves while we're becoming and striving to be who God would have us to be? If you go, what I've been seeing in the word recently is that, what Paul is teaching, and I've been in Paul, so Paul's not the only one. Peter does this too. But they will make a statement. They'll make an argument based on who we are. They will tell us something about who we are in Christ, and then they will give us application. I think that's how we balance it. We reaffirm who we are, and then we read the scriptures about how to apply who we are. So when Paul talks about putting off the old self, he gives us examples of what the new self is, and he talks about the fruit of the Spirit and what that looks like: love, joy, peace, patience, self-control, all of those things. But he also, the argument is, you're a new creature. The application is, here's what it looks like. Here's how this applies to our daily living. He also will turn around and give the negative application and say, if you're still arguing, if you're still fighting, if you still have malice in your heart, then that's a way that you could see that you have not fully given yourself over to the argument that you are a new creature in Christ Jesus. So I think that's how the word helps us balance. It will tell us who we are, and then it'll oftentimes give us examples of the negative and the positive of what that looks like in our daily lives.
Okay. Next question.
All right. Anything coming from our chat?
No, they don't want to chat with us today. They must have ate too many waffles or had omelet with 4-egg omelet instead of 2-egg omelet. All right.
All right. So,
So you can get 2 more questions in because our children have to get to children's church and middle school and teen worship.
all right, leaving the familiar is always difficult.
Mm-hmm.
If we are always in process, which also means that we are always growing slash going, should we not become comfortable anywhere? I think this is a good question, especially if
Okay,
you've
say
been
that,
in.
say that again. Give me that question.
I think this is a good question, especially if you've been with us when we were talking about Paul saying he was content in all things. So the
Mhm.
question is, leaving the familiar is always difficult. If we are always in process, which also means that we are always growing slash going, should we not become comfortable anywhere?
I think I don't think we should ever become comfortable anywhere.
What
I
about
think-
being content
I think
in all
content.
things?
But remember when we talked about the word content, it
Mhm.
means, it does not mean complacent.
Uh-huh.
Content means I am okay with where God has me until God moves me to the next place. Then I'm okay with that. So
Okay.
let's don't get content and complacent mixed up.
Okay.
We should constantly be in a state of growing. We should never be satisfied with where we are, wherever that is, because there is somewhere else God would have us to be. And oftentimes God puts us, well, let me say this, God allows us to be in uncomfortable situations so we can learn, so we can lean and trust and depend on Him. Because when we're in a comfortable situation, we don't need to lean and trust and depend on God. But when we're in an uncomfortable situation, when we're on a tree, on a limb, when we know we have nobody to depend on but God, because we have no net to catch us, that's when we have to depend on God. And that's where God wants to be needed like that.
Always.
Always.
Not just on the limb too, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, praise the
Okay.
Lord. I like the distinction between comfort and complacency.
Mm-hmm.
And
Content and complacent.
content,
Mhm.
sorry.
Mhm.
But also in the context of this question of comfort. I like that question. Good question. You ready for another one?
Okay. Let's say 2 more and then we got to get out of here.
Okay. This is more discussion jumping off point than question.
Okay, well then let's get a question instead of getting it. Let's get a question.
I think the rest of what we have, okay.
Okay. We can put
Okay,
your
we have one
questions
more
here.
proper question, I guess.
Okay.
Wait, there may be one. Hold on. Go ahead and tell them, make sure they're.
All right. You can put your questions here in the app.
Mhm.
In the chat.
Why is it so critical to have a Naomi in your life as a new believer?
I think Naomi teaches us so many things. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to try to bring these out over these next several weeks together. I think to me, I've never preached through the book of Ruth, and I think it's so rich. It's so much stuff there that is just eye-opening. I never, as much as I've read the story, I never until this last week saw the passage where it said after Ruth gave her famous quote where you lies, I lies, your people be my people, my God would be your God would be my God, that Naomi did not say anything to her. She kept quiet. I never saw that. And to me, that's a great thing about reading the Bible over and over again. You miss stuff. And so I think the reason why I believe we need a Naomi, I don't believe we just need a Naomi in our lives as new believers. I think we need Naomi in our lives as believers, period. Okay. We need someone that that can be transparent enough to talk about their flaws. I have a coach who texted me today while the worship experience was going on at 10 o'clock and gave me a word of encouragement. He does not know how much he has blessed my life. Because he talks about his own in his own transparency about things he did or did not do that he has blessed me. Now, if I listen to him better, I'd be much further down the road, but I'm still in the process. All right. So I think we need a Naomi in our life for someone who can. I think to me and Rev Maria and I, we differ on this. I learn a lot by observing. Others learn a lot by doing. So I'm a person that, in growing up in ministry, I sat and I observed and I watched. While others, that's not their testimony. They don't pick up everything because they're not observing. They're not doing that. They learn more by doing. And so for me, Naomi teaches me a lot by observing, by watching how she interacted, we never see her in losing a son, losing a husband, and then 10 years later, losing not just one son, but two sons. And in that culture that she was living in, to have no male covering, to have no one to protect her, to provide for her, she's left to fend for herself and go back. And then not only does she leave Bethlehem to go to Moab, but then she's got to go back to Bethlehem. She left Bethlehem with a husband and two children. Now she goes go back to Moab, go back to Bethlehem with no children and no husband. And so I think, to me, we need that kind of person that models. We don't need somebody who models perfection. To me, we need somebody who models process. That I'm not the person that I was 10 years ago. And here's the things that I did right. Here are the things I did wrong. Whether they verbalize them or not, whether they share them or not, we need somebody like that in our lives as all believers.
I like Naomi, and I think she's good for, like you said, for anybody who's a believer. I like Naomi because Naomi doesn't lose track of the God who is at work, accessible, present in all of it. So while she goes with her husband and her sons, she's doing that with the mindset that God is in control. God is in the midst. When her husband and her son pass away, she still remembers and knows that she is a woman of God and has a connection to God. When she goes back to her people, she remembers and knows how the people of God interact and live out their lives according to their relationship to God and the relationships established with others. So she, because God, she seems to be someone who prefigures the scripture, seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto you. And even while she's doing that, she is honest about her emotions. She doesn't act like her kingdom life is all sunshine and giggles, but she still does not seem to lose touch with the idea that God is there. And though the circumstances may not be what she wants, she still keeps moving it within the reality that God is there. And I really like that about her. And I think we all need people who can remind us in the midst of even the darkest places that God is there.
Okay. You got one more question in us? And if we don't, then we'll
see. You had said that was the last.
Okay,
question.
Well, I think that was a great question. Even though it was offline, that's a great question. All right.
No, it was one of our questions.
Okay.
But what I have left here are more jumping off points for discussion.
Okay.
So here's one that you'll like, though. Discuss how important our witness is, especially during this time of world crisis.
I think you said when the looting and the rioting first came out, you said we as believers have to be careful how we craft this and what we say in response to this. And that's powerful. I think, though I empathize with why the persons are looting and why they are protesting, do I think it's the proper way to speak truth to power? No.
The looting.
Protesting, yes. Last night in Atlanta, place that I've been, I passed by that Wendy's plenty of times on Pryor Road going towards St. Paul.
Wow.
A brother who was in his car sleeping. Police came and said, okay, and then took a breathalyzer. Breathalyzer found out he was drunk. He was sleeping in the car, and subsequently got in a tussle with the arresting officers. One officer was just having a conversation with him, then the other officer came to back up. It escalated into something else. Eventually, to make a long story short, brother grabbed their taser, tased them after he was tased by them, ran off, and then one of the police officers shot him in the back, ran away, died. Subsequently, brothers and sisters went to that Wendy's protesting, went from protesting to setting that Wendy's on fire. Chief of police resigns. All this happened last night in Atlanta. And so I think we have to be careful in our witness. Um, that for me, one of the ways that clergy can do is that we've got to create spaces for people to dialogue about their feelings, their emotions, because people want to be heard. And the reason they're looting and rioting is because they feel they're not being heard. So we've got to create places where people can be heard. And not only places, but to me, that's the first step. The next step is how can we reform? I don't like the word um, uh, defund the police. I think we need reform in the police, additional training, all of these other things. I think we need reform in the government, not just police, but in the totality of government and how we fund things. And so I think our witness as believers, if we're going to be out in those kind of environments, are we providing peace, or are we pushing the laser, burn the MF down?
Well, you know, one of the things that gets lost when we talk about peaceful protests and we reminisce on the civil rights movement, one of the things that gets lost is just how much training went into putting young people and others on the front line in those peaceful protests. There was a lot of training that went on. And I know these are spontaneous protests that are happening now, but which is one of the reasons why we see all of our humanity on display. We see people who are protesting peacefully, but we see people who are angrily looting and doing other things. But it takes training, and if you aren't already trained and strong in the spirit before the crisis happens, it's very highly unlikely that in the midst of the crisis, you'll just all of a sudden be able to, be like Jesus and say not a mumbling word.
Right, because King, in the civil rights movement, there was major training going on before you went to the movement, and you even had to sign a document that said that I'm not going to retaliate if I'm attacked.
It was definitely, that's my point exactly. You had training on how to deal with being attacked and spat on and all the other things that happen. And right now we have people who be like, I'm not like my ancestors, so don't mess with
these hands.
So I think that really how we deal and how we witness in the time of crisis really has to do with how we deal and how we witness in every day, because we've been there. This battle has been raging, and there's a battle raging at all times. But I will say that there have been amazing, this time I think we've seen lots of amazing outbreaks of the kingdom of God in the midst of the protests and all of the unrest that's going on, and the fact that it's global now. I have a friend in Germany who not only reached out to me, but he keeps sending me pictures. He's in Nuremberg, y'all. Nuremberg, Germany, was the heart of Nazism.
Okay.
But that community has learned and banished evil as much probably as any can. And he's on the front lines in Germany fighting for Black Lives Matter. So I think that we need to acknowledge that it's not just us this time, and that it's a major change. But I also think that we are seeing bright spots. There was in Minneapolis, there was a brother that they just rolled up on. I think he said he was from Ghana or Nigeria originally, and he just started talking, and the way he just extemporaneously, just off the cuff, talked about what he wanted to see happen was very much a witness that was kingdom. I don't know if he was a believer, but what he said aligned with the kingdom. And it was powerful. And I was so grateful that it made it on television. It was on CNN. And then the other day, I saw that CNN is using that in one of its promos. So it's what's in us comes up, what's in us comes out. And in crisis, especially. So one of the things we need to do is continue to stay the course and to continue to grow in this progression of being more of the kingdom, because that is what will come out of us.
Okay, that's great stuff as usual, Reverend. And I just encouraged Reverend Maria early this morning before she cooked the pancakes to express herself and all that God has in her in ways that'll be a blessing to a wider to the kingdom. And hopefully y'all gonna be stay tuned, because I'll be keep pushing her to do that. because I'm going to be tuned in um, and hear what thus says the Lord. So thank you again for sharing with us in our sermon chat. After the 10 a.m. worship experience, I look forward to sharing with you on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. in Bible study. And then again, Wednesday night at 7 p.m. in our Wednesday empowerment. And so we try to empower um, everyone. And so please join us for 1 hour, both Tuesday 7 p.m. to 8 Wednesday 7 p.m. to 8.
If you want to pray us out, I think we neglected to pray before.
Okay. Well, prayer is always in order. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you, God, for another opportunity to share. We ask that you would open up our hearts and our minds, that we don't miss this moment in the process of becoming who you would have us to be. We ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Amen. Everybody have a blessed and powerful day. Blessed week.
God bless.